We may never understand the minds of people who are pure evil, but let's explore a story of one of those people whose corrupt way of thinking leads to unthinkable acts. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kimbyrleigha. If you've never been here before, nice to finally meet you. Today's video is a continuation of the last episode of Evil Minds featuring Mark Van Krevel. I highly recommend you watch that one before exploring this story, but you don't have to because this story happens after Mark is in prison and it features two more psychos that were mentioned in the last episode, Mark's sister Belinda and Mark's BFF Keith. And don't worry, I'll give you a little quick recap for those of you that did tune in for Mark's horrific acts last time. That way, everyone will be up to speed as we dive into the lives of two more people with evil minds. Let's take a journey to Australia for this episode, or a journey back for some of you, and we're landing in Wollongong thanks to the subscriber from Australia that corrected the way I was pronouncing it. Thank you, Wollongong. It's a large coastal city located south of Sydney, Australia. Sort of a beach town, if you will, and this is where Mark and Belinda Van Krevel were born. They had a rough upbringing with their mother, Elizabeth, who was very unstable, and their father constantly fighting with her. Eventually, their parents got a divorce, and their father, Jack, ended up taking the kids full-time, even though they were given 50-50 custody. Elizabeth left and hardly came back into the children's lives until they were adults. Mark was unruly. He frequently got in trouble, and Jack tried his very best to be there for him, even took parenting classes, hired nannies, and bought the kids anything they wanted in order to just spend time with them. My rats are up at night because they're nocturnal and they're deciding to eat. So if you hear a bell, that's them. And I apologize. There's nothing I'm going to be able to do about it. And no, I don't have rats, wild rats in my house. They're my pets. This didn't stop Mark from being obsessed with the occult and basically wanting to grow up to become a serial killer. Now, he wasn't alone in this. No, he wasn't. He had a best friend. He met this friend in high school, and that was Keith Schreiber. They enjoyed listening to death metal, learning about Satanism, and reading a book called Serial Killers from A to Z. I kind of want to read that book as well. Gonna look and see if they still make it. Mark dropped out of high school and Belinda followed in his footsteps. She adored her brother, who was only 18 months older than her. They grew up like they were twins, and Belinda even has a tattoo on her arm that says Mark. He must have really made his mark on her. Cheesy joke, but kind of weird. Her brother's name tattooed on her arm. Maybe they were just a little bit closer than we know. Mark and Keith, they stayed in touch, and by their late teens, they started to live together at Keith's house. Mark could not hold down a job, but he did spend a lot of his time practicing Taekwondo. Keith, on the other hand, he had a job. He worked at the fish market, filleting fish all day long. He would show Mark, and this became one of the obsessions that Mark had, wanting to actually try this out on humans. And one day he did, twice. Mark committed 2 gruesome crimes back-to-back in June of 1998. One was the murder of David O'Hearn, who was a local shopkeeper, and the second was Frank Arkell, a former mayor. More on that in the video linked above and in the description, and I'll let you know. There is a secret link to the entire crime scene in that video's description box. Check it out if you want, but I warn you, it's the most disturbing crime scene I've probably ever looked at. Both victims were basically filleted. Lots of other really disgusting things were done to the bodies, which I cannot mention and don't want to. Things were stuck into certain private places, and it was just obscene. Then in August of 1998, Mark and Keith, only 19 at the time, decided to rob a gas station together dressed as ninjas. One was armed with a samurai sword and the other with a machete, and they marched in and demanded what was in the cash register. They walked away with a measly $300, and so they took some cigarettes as a consolation prize. Keith was arrested and he pleaded guilty, and this was his first offense, but I'd actually argue it's his second. Have you seen his hair? Yeah. It should be a crime, seriously. That is the worst attempt at the glorious inverse mohawk I have ever seen. That this was the first time he got in trouble, and she said, he couldn't find a job, which caused him to seek other ways to get some quick cash. So she pleaded with the court not to send him to jail, instead to allow him to be placed in a special program to teach life skills and help him become a functioning part of society. The judge decided to allow it, and I am sure she would come to regret it. Everything was going well until Mark was sentenced and sent away. The stress of losing his very best friend really took a toll on Keith. Mark never got his wish of becoming a serial killer because he confessed 4 months later after confiding in his Taekwondo teacher, who ended up persuading him to go straight to the police.
In your own words, can you tell me what information you have about the death of Mr. O'Hearn?
I don't know anything much about David himself, but I murdered him. I don't know much about him.
Mark, however, did get to live vicariously through his best friend Keith. So as a team, they were serial killers, and what are friends for, I guess, when you're both this sick in the head? You see, when Mark was on trial, he claimed that he was triggered, that it wasn't his fault, it wasn't planned, that he snapped due to horrific things that were done to him as a child at the hands of his own father, Jack. Now, Jack did admit that he went hard on Mark, hitting him maybe more than he should, but he was adamant he had never done anything inappropriate to him, ever. However, Mark's sister Belinda, remember Belinda? Oh, she didn't believe that. She stuck by Mark's side. Here she is, coming out of the court after Mark was sentenced to life in prison in the Supermax, which is reserved for the worst of the worst, and as a matter of fact, he was the youngest person ever sentenced there.
Drove him to do what he did. He's the one that should be in jail, not my brother.
It did seem odd that Mark had never mentioned anything about his father being indecent his entire life, but I was thinking, if it were true, would he have? It's assumed that Mark was only saying this to receive a lighter sentence because he never mentioned it in the interview with the police when he confessed, even though he was given ample time. He was asked questions like this one.
Is there any reason why you did it?
Why I killed David O'Hearn? I was like, I don't know. Not really, no. I mean, I was angry that day, but no particular reason, no. I had in my mind that I wanted to kill someone that day. I was really angry and I said to myself, I could kill someone.
To the contrary, he said he just felt like killing someone that day. Plus, that book that I mentioned, Serial Killers A to Z, well, it was bad enough that he acted like it was his Bible, but he also wrote inside the cover. There was a list of all the people he intended to kill. David and Frank were on that list. So how was this not planned? Look, you can see right here, there are the names. Plus, he was already planning his third. Oh, and there's a whole list. And I'm going to show you this in detail later on because I'm telling you, you're going to be shocked to find out the details. I'm going to save that to talk more about what was going on during the trial. Let's go back there. While on trial, Belinda, Keith, and Mark would actually act like complete fools. I mean, what do you expect for people like this? But they would gesture to one another, they would try to relay messages of some kind, and they were just very disrespectful of the court as a whole. It's as though they believed that they were above the law. Of course they did, especially when you hear about everything that they're going to do. When Mark's ex-girlfriend had to take the stand, she was so flustered because of the way that Mark kept looking at her. She urged the judge to remand him for trying to affect her testimony. And that's just the way Mark was. And even though Mark seemed to have betrayed his father, Jack actually felt like he was to blame for what Mark had done. He figured since he was the one that raised him, he had failed. It even seemed like he was willing to go along with any story that Mark's claim was true, just so that his son could claim diminished responsibility for his crimes. Oh, and Mark's mother was also on his side, even though she abandoned him when he was a child, and it just seemed like she hated her ex-husband Jack so much, because this is what she said after the trial.
Father's fault! I'll get you, Jack! I'll get you!
I know these are both familiar to people who have already watched episode 1, But I had to do this recap because I want you to remember the people we're talking about. And while talk is cheap, words are just not enough when the hatred for Jack is too deep and the love for Mark is as strong as it was when it came to Belinda. Belinda Van Krevel had been dubbed Belinda Van Evil. Belinda is actually known as one of Australia's most notorious criminals. I guess evil minds must think alike. And it makes me wonder if evil is hereditary, if it's nature or nurture, or in this case, they do have the same blood and upbringing. So maybe it was inevitable that both of them, brother and sister, would turn out to be pure evil. You tell me your thoughts. Now, a little about Belinda. She had to grow up quite fast after her mom left. She was only about 2 years old, and she grew up to take on the role of the woman of the house, if you will. Even though she was a very young girl, she was learning to cook, doing all the cleaning, that sort of thing. Belinda swears, just like her father had already admitted, that she was hit by him, and that there was violence in that household directed at both children. She grew up to absolutely hate her father, Jack. It seemed like the feelings were quite mutual. However, after Belinda dropped out of high school and had her first child, a daughter she named Tia, Jack adored Tia. And I think this was maybe to make up for lost time or the way that he acted towards his own child. Belinda said she was beaten every single day. And according to her, she was in constant fear for her life. She said she truly felt like he got pleasure out of hurting other people and out of their pain. So maybe it is where Mark got it from. Apparently, it was even worse for Mark. Belinda truly believes she and Mark are the way that they are because of what Jack did to them, or so she says. Was this true, or was it just an excuse for murder? I'm not talking about the murders you already know about. I think you may have guessed where this is going. Only 2 weeks after Mark's trial was over, another murder occurred, and this one was way closer to home. Let's go backward and start from the time the trial ended. Somehow, and I don't have too many details about this union, but Belinda begins dating Keith. Now, it may have been because they were both distraught over losing Mark. They could both relate to what was happening. They both seemingly believed Jack was a terrible person. It wouldn't have been that hard to convince Keith, since Jack would frequently curse Keith out when he was younger and kick him out of the house because he thought that he was a loser and a bad influence on Mark. Or maybe Belinda started showing interest in Keith because it was part of her manipulative master plan. She decides to confide in Keith, telling him that Jack had done inappropriate things to her daughter Tia, who was only about 2 or 3 at the time. However, isn't it kind of interesting that if this were true, Belinda never pressed any charges or alerted the authorities about it? You would think if this was really happening to your daughter, she would have done so. But not only that, she and Tia were still living with Jack. Could have been out of necessity, but would that justify exposing your child to this behavior? I don't think so. So was it made up? Because personally, I'm leaning toward yes. But you decide after what you hear happens. Now, in all fairness, if we can even extend fairness here at the very least, Keith's mental health was on a steady decline. So much so that his probation officer ordered him to go seek help from a therapist. He was having severe insomnia. At that point, he didn't even have a place to live, which may be why he also started dating Belinda, because that way he could have some support and maybe, he could spend time over there from time to time. And this was probably just one more way that she convinced him to get closer to her for her own deadly agenda. I can't even believe this is true. It kind of reminds me of that Meatloaf song, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. But Keith should have been playing that song on repeat because he did do that. On August 15th, Keith went to get a mental health assessment, and this is when he admitted that he hated Jack. He said that he knew that he had harmed Tia, and it seemed like he was so emotionally distraught over this. But they didn't find any definable mental illness. However, they did think that he had the potential to hurt himself or others, but of course, as we've heard in so many cases like this, nothing was done. Now, what about Jack himself? What was going on with him? Well, he had just been accused of being the reason his only son brutally took the life of 2 people, plus being publicly pegged as someone who does indecent things with his son, as being the root cause of all this. Well, Jack did consider moving away, but he told his friends and his family he could not bear the thought of leaving Tia with Belinda. She was a drug addict, and he feared for Tia's safety. As a matter of fact, he mentioned his intention to cut both Mark and Belinda out of his will and leave everything to Tia. He was afraid that Belinda would carelessly spend the money to fuel her addiction. After a lot of convincing by Jack's family, he did decide to move away from all of the chaos in August of 2000, but it was just temporary. They didn't know this, and they were really relieved because they really thought Belinda was going to do something to him. And if they only knew. Jack ends up moving away, and then it only lasts for a day. Yes, one day, because he tries to reach out and check on Tia, and Belinda is nowhere to be found. He called, and he could not reach her. Now, this is when the first crazy thing happened. When he arrives back to the house that he shared with Belinda and Tia, his ex-wife shows up. You know, the seemingly psycho woman that we heard say, "I'm going to get him for what he did to Mark." Well, she tries to essentially warn Jack that Belinda was going to get Keith to kill him. Can you imagine hearing this? Like, just think about it for a minute. Like hearing that someone is going to kill you. Someone you know doesn't really like you that much, because I'm sure Jack heard the news when Belinda was on there saying, it's my dad's fault that all of this happened. He should be in prison, not Mark.
Drove him to do what he did. He's the one that should be in jail, not my brother.
And Jack, knowing everything that Mark did and how close Mark and Keith were, I have to say I would be afraid. According to his ex-wife, Elizabeth, Belinda had tried to convince Keith to off Jack for a measly $2,000, and I've seriously heard people doing this type of thing for much less. And every time I'm just sitting here stunned. Who in their right mind risks prison or, prison for life or the death penalty for a little bit of cash? You're not going to be able to spend it when you're behind bars. I just don't really think they think it through. I assume that most of them are definitely not in the right mindset when they decide to do this. Well, Jack did not trust Elizabeth. They were always in fights. She was always creating drama. So he doesn't believe her, and therefore he doesn't report it to the police or anything. He moves right back into his home with Tia and Belinda. And I kind of understand, because it must be hard. You love your own blood. You love your own children. And it's sad when they turn against you. I can't help but feel bad for Jack, and I do realize that I can't know for sure whether he did those things to Tia and Mark. But I know that Mark is a piece of absolute shit, so I tend to believe otherwise. So to think that he had to live with the fact his own son committed those gruesome crimes, blamed it on him, his daughter's a drug addict who hates him, he's lost so much. It's like he really had no choice but to hold on to the crappy things that he still has instead of nothing. And that's sad. Well, it wasn't long before there was more drama in the Van Krevel household. Jack and Belinda get into a total blowout fight. Belinda, of course, runs off to tell Keith all about what an a-hole Jack is, and to top it off, she says that Jack called Keith a bunch of derogatory names. They had enough. It was time to take their problems to their God, the one that they seem to worship, and that's Mark. You would think it's the devil, Satanism and everything, but it was definitely Mark. So they try to pay him a visit, but because they don't plan ahead, they're rejected as visitors because you need to follow protocol, especially for such a high security prison. Boo-hoo, no rendezvous for them. And I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Would Mark have talked some sense into them, or would he have encouraged their next move? No one will ever know. When they get turned away, they drive to a shopping mall and they park the car and they talk for hours, perhaps planning what was going to happen next. Keith did leave the car to go and do some shopping, and he returned with a pair of black gloves. Seems kind of sketchy, doesn't it? And after a few hours of chit-chatting, planning, and hanging out, Keith drove Belinda back to Jack's, and then he left. Jack did not know what was coming to him, But now, only 2 weeks later, in the early morning hours of August 18th, 2000, around midnight, he was face to face with a killer with a familiar face. Keith had come for his revenge. He grabbed an axe that was left outside the house as though it was strategically placed there for him. Then he climbed through an open window that led into 2-year-old Tia's room. Conveniently, she wasn't sleeping in there that night. She was in a nearby bedroom, tucked under the covers with Belinda as Keith opened Jack's bedroom door while he slept. His intention? Hack him while he wasn't awake, finish him off easily, and just leave. But things didn't go exactly as planned. Or did they? Partially, perhaps, since the alarm system that Jack religiously armed every night, I mean, of course he did. He knows what people are capable of, because of course his son killed people. Well, that alarm system was off. Who do you think did that? Maybe that went as planned, but Jack fought back. I'm going to save you the details because you'll hear it from Keith himself. He's a monster, just like his lover and best friend. Belinda and Tia were under the covers, pulled up over their heads, hearing every gasp and every strike, with Belinda telling Tia to be quiet. And it's sickening to me to think that she knew exactly what was going on because she ordered it, just like ordering food off of a menu. She wanted Jack on, and Keith carried out those wishes just like that. Tia even asked her mommy, "What's happening to Poppy?" These monsters don't even think about what this innocent child is going through. After the noises stopped, Belinda heard the door to her room opening. Was she scared, I wonder? For a split second, could she have actually imagined that Keith would go rogue and off her and Tia as well, in his murderous, crazy rage, that maybe he couldn't be stopped? Or was this a signal? A sign that it was all over and that she could come out now? An evil game of hide and seek, yet Keith knew where she was hiding, and he let her know the coast was clear. After this, Belinda carried Tia to her car and drove to the police station. However, instead of driving to the one right down the road in Albion Park, she drove to one 15 minutes away. Why? Well, it could have been that she was distraught, right? Because after all, even though she wanted this so much, it's different when you imagine it and then realize it really happened, but I doubt it. She's just such a good liar. And I can't wait till you hear what she says. You'll see. You'll see what a good liar she is. Tell me what you think. When she arrives, she tells police she heard someone come inside her home and she got scared. So she hid under the covers until the noises stopped, and then she headed over to report that her father had been murdered. Why not call? She has a phone, not only just in the home, but a cell phone. Why drive over? For what reason? She could have run to a neighbor's house and called from there. She said she never even went to his body either. Wouldn't you though? If this was your loved one, how would she know he was deceased? Wouldn't you at least try to call for help or try to help him? Maybe the 15-minute drive was just an extra measure to make sure they wouldn't get to Jack. If there was even like a slight chance that he was still holding on for dear life. You have to hear her story. They take her in for the interview, and just wait until you hear her version of events. Are you ready? I'm going to play it for you.
What did you hear?
Like that, but really loud, like someone breathing really heavy, but like that, but really loud. Like I can't even describe what it was like. It was awful. And then I heard like that, but like louder, like going shh.
How do you feel about your father's death now?
Oh, I don't know. Not sad as yet, but it'll happen.
Maybe it's her accent, but doesn't she seem so believable? But there's a lot lacking. This is her father. There's no tears, no emotion, nothing. It's all about her. She was scared for her life, yeah, but no care for her father's. As she hears him fighting for his life in the next room, she couldn't lean over and call the police or escape through a window and run for help. Of course not. She's a cold, evil monster who wanted her own father to feel this pain. It's unreal. Then she explains what she does next. That she doesn't even open her dad's door to check on him.
How do you feel about what's happened?
I'm scared for my sake and for Tia's sake. Then I didn't want to stay in the house either. There was no way in the world I was going to open my dad's door. I wanted to get out of there.
Again, she's scared for herself and for her daughter, but expresses zero concern over what happened to Jack. Zero concern, nothing at all. And this next part was really interesting to me. Listen carefully, and then let's come back to analyze this a bit before we just take it at face value, because I had to listen to this a few times.
I don't want to get Mark in trouble or anything like that. He's already in enough trouble. But I've always had my suspicions about those two killings, and now this happening, everything isn't fitting together, and I don't know what to do.
Yes, she starts with, she doesn't want to get Mark into trouble, but then the next sentence is what I focused on the most. She says that she's had her suspicions about the men Mark is serving time for killing. Then she says, now this is happening, and she doesn't think it's fitting together, and she doesn't know what to do. If we break this down, she's trying to say, in my opinion, that Mark isn't responsible, that she suspected someone else did it, someone else killed those men, and that Mark has taken the blame. This is happening to Jack is her way of manipulating the police. She's acting like it's a sign that Mark is innocent. The killing is a similar style and everything, so couldn't it be someone else? Police want to know who. But of course police aren't buying it. They were of the mindset that Mark obviously organized someone to kill Jack, that he's the mastermind. They also had their target set on someone they knew was close enough to Mark that he may carry out this crime on his behalf. Someone who was also obsessed with finding out what it might be like to take a life. Keith was in their crosshairs. I think they were hoping that Belinda would give them his name. Belinda acts like she doesn't even know anything. She just suggests that maybe Mark is covering for someone.
Who do you think is responsible for your father's death?
I don't know.
And then she says it. Keith. But she says she doesn't think he has the guts to carry it out.
I don't want to get Mark in trouble, but maybe he is covering for someone and they said that they'd do this for him, or maybe he's asked someone, I don't know, to do it.
Well, having said that, then who would you think he would get to do it?
Oh, I don't know. If he hadn't have said the things that he'd said to me about Keith, I'd say Keith. But apparently he's gutless.
The police know better. As a matter of fact, Mark himself wrote Jack's name in his little Bible, the serial killer's A to Z book. You can see it right here. It says who will be his number 3. There's a good chance it would have been Jack had Mark not confessed to the other 2. They decide to pay Mark a little visit, inform him of his father's death, and of course, he has no reaction. Nothing. Why would he? He wanted him dead. But get this. Mark wants to hear details. That's what he wants. Basically, so he could probably get off on it. He wants to know exactly how Jack died, what was done to him. He wants to know everything. Police are smarter than that, and they refuse to give him any information in regard to specifics. But what Mark didn't say was that he had anything to do with what happened to Jack. They want to know where they can find Keith, so they ask his girlfriend Belinda, wouldn't she know? Since she's been spending so much time with him, here's what she says.
He's homeless.
He's homeless, is he?
Yeah, that's what he said anyway.
Did he say where he was going?
When we were sitting in the car when I first went there, he told me that he was staying under a bridge and he got a sheet of tin or something and put it up. So I suppose he was just sleeping. I don't know. He didn't tell me where he was going, but I assume he probably had nowhere to go.
He's in fact homeless, according to her. And luckily, police get a phone call, a little tip that he's at a train station nearby, so they don't even hesitate. They run over there, they pick him up, and they bring him in for questioning. Now, remember I said that I was going to hold off on the details in order for Keith to tell you himself? Well, that's definitely going to happen. However, I'm also going to do what I did in the last episode. There's an unlisted video link below in the description box and up in the cards, but just click below if and only if you want to see the crime scene. Then come back here. There'll be another link in that description box. It'll bring you right back to this exact point in the video, and you can pick up where you left off. I'll see you in a minute if you decide to do so, or if you are going to stay, we will pick back up at Keith's interview. It's interesting to me, Mark and Keith, to me, sound so much alike. I'll show you after we hear a little bit more from Keith himself.
Okay, Keith. Well, is there anything you can tell us about the incident that occurred last night with Mr. Jack Van Krevel?
I've done it. Happy?
Can you tell me why you did it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was depressed and angry. He's paid for what he done to Mark and Belinda.
When this was happening, did you say anything to Jack?
Yeah, sort of for revenge for Mark. I told him when I turned the light on, I told him this is for Mark. You'll never molest another kid again.
I don't know if you caught the end there. He wants revenge for what he thinks Jack did to Mark and Belinda. Basically, the two people who have shown Keith love in his life. Yes, the pictures that I have, the pictures that we have here from the internet, they make both Mark and Keith look weird, look like killers. That's what the media does. They exaggerate. I mean, they are killers, but they exaggerate and they purposely choose pictures that are going to make you say, oh my God, that are going to shock you, shock value. We do it here on YouTube. It's just part of getting the attention so that you hear the story. So yes, they look insane just by looking at their pictures. But all in all, in my point of view, they also look like normal guys. If you didn't know, normal 19-year-olds. It's shocking to me that they can so easily admit to these horrific crimes. I know if you're here and didn't go look at the crime scene, you haven't heard about what it looked like. But he's about to go into that. But first, I want to do what I said I was going to do and compare Mark and Keith and show you how similar they acted in their interviews. Here's Mark.
I said to myself, I could kill someone.
What made you angry?
I don't know, some stress, I guess.
What type of stress?
Oh, I just stress out a lot.
To relieve the stress you were under, you went out and did this?
Yeah.
And now, here's Keith.
What were you feeling when you were doing this?
Loneliness. I was feeling lonely.
You said earlier that you
Yeah, fucking hatred and anger, fucking. But when I was doing loneliness as well.
I don't know. What do you think? Birds of a feather? I don't know. Police described Keith's demeanor in the interview as erratic because he would constantly switch between emotional states. He would show signs of sadness, then irritation, and then he would just shut down completely. And this went on throughout the whole interview. And here, I do notice his body language. He does really look confused and flustered, but most notably, he looks like he has this lack of care about what he did and how heinous it really was. Now, this part is hard to listen to, and I'm sorry.
When this was happening, did you say anything to Jack?
Yeah, sort of for revenge for Mark. I told him when I turned the light on, I told him this is for Mark.
This is what Jack had to hear in his last moments, which, if we're incorrect, we're just a guy spewing lies, and there was nothing he could do no matter how hard he tried. Or in those moments, if it were true, perhaps all he felt was that regret, because this is where it led. Now for the crime scene walkthrough. Look what they put him in. Look, it's just weird. It's the suit, looks like a garbage bag, and they have it practically zipped over his whole face. There's only a small portion that are showing like just his eyes, so he's able to look out while he explains, the walkthrough of the crime scene and what happened. They tell him it's because they want to shield him from the media, but why? Doesn't it make sense that a person like this should lose any semblance of normal rights? Lose the right to privacy? Shouldn't they just wear that scarlet letter, so to speak? It may be different in Australia, but I think that it should be everywhere. His face should be up in lights. But maybe they don't want to glamorize killing. Here in the US, I know we just plaster that everywhere. And I always seem to think that's what they get. Like everybody should know their name. But now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that's not such a good thing. Here's what he shows the police. He shows them where he retrieved the axe, where he came through the window, that conveniently didn't have a screen like all the others. And he intended on doing all of this while Jack was asleep, but his foot hit the side of the bed and it caused Jack to wake up.
And I kicked it like that.
And that's what made the noise?
Yeah. And he woke up.
Then he raised the axe and then swung it downward again and again.
And he woke up. Whack. And I hit him again.
I'll have some additional details about what he did to Jack, but let's find out what was going on in Keith's mind.
Hatred and anger, but before, when I was doing loneliness as well, I felt sort of wanted him to get me first.
Why were you hoping that?
Fucking hate my life. If you can call it life.
He was lonely. He hated Jack, but at the same time, he almost hoped, as he expressed, that Jack would have turned the axe on him because he hates his own life. If you could even call it that, he said. I know that this may be the minority opinion here, but this made me a little bit sad. It makes me wonder what went so wrong in Keith's life that he really felt like he didn't even have one to live. I don't know much about his upbringing. All I know is that his parents were divorced when he was 12 and that it had a major impact on him. I mentioned it in the last episode that divorce is so common nowadays. It's almost unthinkable that it would cause a child to become a killer for the simple reason that their parents decide they don't want to live their life together but separately. I wouldn't stay with someone on account of my child, and I've left 2 men who I didn't want to be with, even though one of them was my daughter's father and the other one had raised her since she was 3. My happiness and well-being is important for the long term, and mother knows best, in my opinion. Children don't always understand. And if the relationship is not good, it's better not to have your children witness that, in my opinion, so they'll know what a healthy relationship looks like. But perhaps Keith was told lies. Maybe that it was his fault. Or maybe his parents were not the greatest. Maybe he felt abandoned and then he got into drugs. We know that he hung out with Mark a lot, also the product of divorce, and they seemed to have thrived off of each other's pain in the worst ways. Tell me if you have gone through a divorce. Have you had parents that have? If you're open to it, I like hearing those things in the comment section. Here's what else Keith said happened.
Yeah, he's going, hey, and I'm stabbed him more. I turned the light on as I come back in, and then that's when he seen me. And then I hit him a few times with the stoker.
He didn't stop. He just kept going. And not only that, he left to get another item, a poker from the fireplace, which ended up being bent from the force of the blows on Jack. This time, when Keith comes back, he ruthlessly turns on the lights. And Jack realizes it's him. How wicked and horrifying to know who this person was that's inflicting this pain on you. Then, when he's finished, he just turns and leaves, closing that door behind him as though he's shutting away everything that just happened on the other side of it. But he didn't tell them what he really did. No, he didn't. When police opened that door, what was left of Jack was kneeling over the bed. Keith didn't just leave him after what you just heard. He stayed to use his fillet skills all over him. The interesting thing was when police asked him to show them where he got the knife, for instance, he couldn't recall. He was, you'll see, fumbling through all the drawers in the kitchen. He was getting angry when he couldn't figure out where he found the knife.
Tell us exactly what you did.
Yep. stuck in a drawer. Where did I get it from?
There's another drawer there.
Police started to think this was because everything was set up real nicely for Keith. And we know it was. Belinda set it out for him, just like she set out the axe. Easy access. There were 25 axe wounds and 14 knife wounds. This wasn't just one and done. This took time and rage. That was prior to the filleting. And it's disgusting. And it's sad and unbelievable, but true. There were also bloody footprints throughout the home. And there was a trail of them going from Jack's bedroom through the hallway to the fireplace and then back. There were also footprints leading into Tia's room, and then there was one on her little kid's chair, a chair that Keith used to climb back through the window that he came through so he could leave. Investigators were able to get a nice full footprint off of some tiles. And later they were able to compare the imperfections from the soles of the shoes Keith was wearing to the prints on the floor. They were an exact match. And it wasn't as though they even needed more evidence, but it's really good to have all that you can so that these evil people are put away for good. Now let's go to what Belinda said she heard when all of this was happening.
What did you hear?
Like that, but really loud, like someone breathing really heavy, but like that, but really loud. Like I can't even describe what it was like. It was awful.
I can't believe she plays out these sounds like it's a song she heard instead of the cries of her own father. Oh, and she tries to throw police off because she asks them, was he shot? Really? She was sitting there hearing what was happening, and I'm guessing there was no gunshot. And this was her attempt to cover up the fact that she knew exactly what happened. You're not that smart, Belinda. You're not. Nope. Conniving, maybe smart, no.
Not sad as yet, but it'll happen.
She's not sad yet? She never will be. She's as cold as ice. Now, police are on to her, and of course they are. She's the sister of a wannabe serial killer in a super max security jail. They begin to ask Keith about their relationship.
4 or so weeks, so you've actually been in a relationship with Belinda Van Krevel.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you care to tell me about that?
It's irrelevant.
Is it correct?
Sort of, yeah.
He says it's irrelevant. Really? Well, Belinda admits to police that during the 4-hour conversation in the car, she told Keith about what Jack supposedly did to Tia.
When we were talking, I had photos in my car, and I was showing him some photos of me and Mark together when we were little, because we're always together.
Did you tell Keith about what happened to Tia?
Oh, yeah.
What's he say?
Oh, he got pretty angry.
Here's what Keith said.
Jack molested Mark, and Tia's been, his granddaughter has been saying, coming out with a few weird things.
Did she ask you to do it?
Yeah, I know she wanted him done.
She wanted him done?
Mm.
She wanted him done. That's it. I don't have the entire interview, but they also asked him how long he was planning this, and he said for a little while. But when Belinda told him about that argument with Jack, she said that Jack said to her, quote, I really hope that pissy little Aunt Poofta Keith fucking comes here and tries to kill me. I don't know what that means. I don't know what those little pissy aunt, I don't know, maybe that's a little Australian slang, let me know. But Keith says that he got what he asked for. That's the way he explains it. Like he was doing him a favor. But he lets police know that it was Belinda that urged him to get rid of her father. Keith is easy. He's arrested right away, especially after he leads police to the bloody clothing he was wearing at the crime scene. It was thrown into a dumpster, and he shows police exactly where it was. In court, his defense attorneys, though, explained that Keith was in a poor mental state, that he was fixated on the supposed inappropriate things that he was told that Jack had done to Mark, and especially Tia. And the defense claims, as it turns out, that Keith was also a victim of this type of thing with a teacher when he was younger, and like Mark's excuse, he was triggered. Both Jack's sister, Sue, and his brother said that he was the best dad, and that he basically would lay down his life for Mark. Literally, he would lie and die for his children, which he did. Sue said he never did the things they claimed. He never would.
As a brother, I just could not imagine Jack being physically abusive, like violently abusive, let alone sexually abusive. That is just impossible to think that could be true.
Guess what? Belinda inherited the money from Jack. He never changed the will like he said he was going to do. So that money went straight to her. Of course, she's going on shopping sprees. She's spending thousands of dollars every week on everything from cars to clothes to meth. All Jack's hard-earned cash just thrown away. If I had to guess, I'd say that Belinda and Mark inherited their evil minds from their mother, Elizabeth. As soon as she found out about the money, she tried to worm her way back into her daughter's life. But the minute Belinda refused, Elizabeth went right to police to tell them about the hit that Belinda put out on her father. How Belinda had talked about wanting to kill Jack for a long time. She just switches just like that. This family's crazy. Now the police have to build a case, and it's not like the movies. These things take time. And I don't know why they took as long as they did, because a whole 8 months had to go by before they really drilled into Belinda and her involvement. 8 months, almost a whole year. And she probably thought she was going to get away with it while Keith sat in prison awaiting his sentence. She used him. She must have, right? Because what would this be? She really fall in love with Keith? Well, the correction officer tells police that she would ask for messages to be sent to Keith, like how much she loved him, and they found love letters in his holding cell. She was also giving Keith money. When questioned about this, she tells police she never gave Keith any money after Jack was killed. No.
Have you ever paid Keith any money?
No. For what?
Since your father's death, have you ever given him any money?
No, I haven't.
But they need to take it a step further, so they get a search warrant on her home, and they kind of hit the mother lode. They end up finding a number of money order forms that show Belinda was sending money to Keith's account.
Post office on the 9th of April 2001 in the amount of $200.
While he was in jail. And not only that, letters were found. Letters from Keith. Letters sent to her that were allegedly responses to the letters that she wrote to him. Is this confusing? Kind of. But we're talking about the fact that there were letters there, talking about things that wouldn't make sense unless they were responses.
Just located a letter on the one that's got Keith.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Alright,
Keith
okay,
Schreiber?
well that's, yeah, obviously.
She was acting like she cared about him, talking about money. So the police want to know why. Why? Why are you corresponding with the man who killed your father? And she says, well, we're still friends.
In the letter, Keith's talking about, I should have bought a radio with that money, but all I got was a kettle for $30 and the rest on tobacco and drinks and food. This is the person that killed your father, and you're sending him money.
Yeah, and?
Did you think that was a bit strange?
No, not really, no.
Okay.
I'm still friends with him, I talk to him, so...
Right, Belinda. So they dig deeper because it's not normal. None of this is. How can she lie so easily? She's pushing back when they ask about her relationship with Keith.
What was your relationship with Keith Schreiber at the time your dad was murdered?
It was, a normal sort of relationship. Just friends, you know.
So you weren't going out with each other?
No.
And you'd ever gone out with Keith Schreiber?
No, I never even thought about it.
You ever had any relationships with him? Sexual wise or any nature like that?
I won't answer that. I don't think that's got anything to do with this.
It's actually got a lot to do with it, because it's investigating the murder of your father.
Yeah, but what's sex got to do with someone being murdered?
We're just trying to work out what relationship you had with the person who murdered your father.
And it wouldn't make a difference, would it?
Well, it may make a difference to our investigation.
Why's that?
Well, that's all we have to work out.
Oh, right. Okay then. Yeah, right. What was the next question?
Huh. At the end, what's the next question? Way to be defensive. But they find letters that contradict her anyway. Meanwhile, Belinda's friends and ex-boyfriends, they're all being interviewed. And a high school friend that knew her way back when she was 15 said that Belinda would talk about how she wanted to kill Jack, how much she hated him, and wanted to just take his money. She ended up asking people if they would take care of it for her if she gave them, $2,000. Wow. Evil from the womb, I'm telling you. An ex-boyfriend named Scott, who dated Belinda before she was dating Keith, came forward with information about how Belinda wanted both of her parents dead. Imagine telling your friends and your boyfriends this. And what would you do if someone told you that? She goes on to tell him about her plan, that she left all the items out for Keith so that he could use them on Jack. The axe, the knife, even a torch, which I don't think was ever used, but still a torch. Remember what I said about the door? The fact that Belinda said the door to her room was open and she thought, I'm gonna die. Well, I mentioned thinking that this was more of a sign or a signal that Keith was done and that the coast was clear. Well, the ex-boyfriend says that's true. He said that Keith crept into the room and said, "Hey, baby, it's finished." That's sick. It's like he's cooking dinner or something, just so nonchalant. Speaking of food, which is sickening to do after what we know happened, Belinda actually made Keith a Vegemite sandwich with Jack's remains laying in the next room. That is disgusting. It's heartless and it's evil. Scott hadn't just come forward with this information on his own. He had to be questioned thoroughly because, of course, Belinda threatened to have him and his grandmother of all people killed. I'd be afraid. I get it. She's a woman of her word, it seems. And it's clear she manipulated Keith with sex, pretending to love him and care about him, giving him money. But do you think a part of her did love him and that he loved her? I think there was definitely a bond there for sure, but I would not call it love. June 1st, 2002, Belinda was officially charged with solicitation for the murder of her father, Jack. But if you think this is over, think again, because this woman is just getting started. That's why we're going to pick up in the next episode of Evil Minds with what happens next, because you won't believe it, and there's way too much to tell in one video, but you won't be disappointed. You'll never guess all the crazy twists and turns this case will take. Like I said, she's just getting started. There's just something about Belinda, and you'll find out more next time. So thank you all so much for watching. I will see you in my next video. Bye.